Exactly 1 year ago today, I uploaded my very first video for this channel, which, if you recall correctly, was about the Monster Hunter World Beta. Something I made with one idea in my mind, to share my thoughts about a video game with the world. Something that I've been wanting to do for years, even if it wasn't the most original of ideas. I wanted to make this channel because in my regular life I really don't have anyone to talk about this stuff, and I find it kinda hard to navigate my way through social interactions, even on the internet. As such, the only other way I could find that would let me do that was uploading videos. Either that or just screaming to a hole in the ground, but I felt the former was productive, so I went for it. I wasn't expecting to gain anything out of doing this. In fact, I still kinda don't. Although it would be nice to be able to make a living out of this in the future, but I reckon that's like 5 or 10 years away down the line with my schedule. And that's if I get really lucky, but that's besides the point. Still, even if it has been just a year of this channel's existence, I feel like I've accomplished some stuff with it. Like meeting some nice people, for example Oni and Sonikick, which by the way, shoutouts to you guys for being awesome, and I'm sorry for not being able to record more episodes of the Power Hour with you guys. I promise I'll fix that in the future. Anyways, because this is the first year anniversary for this channel and this is a special occasion, I wanted to share with you guys one of my favorite games of all time. And I hope that at the end of this video, at least some of you give it a try. So let's roll with the actual intro for this video, shall we? This game means a lot to me. Every time I play it, I feel myself going back to my childhood and reliving all the good memories I associate with it. From when I got introduced to it via one of the very few people I could consider a friend back then, to the first and only time I've ever beat it, except for this review of course. I cannot stress this enough, but I love this game. I've spent so much time with it and it has a huge sentimental value for me. It may sound a little bit silly, but this game was essential to the formation of my personality early on. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that without it, this very channel would not have existed. Why? Well, as I mentioned back during my Mega Man X4 video, back in the day my grasp of the English language was non-existent. And while that game was part of the reason as to why I decided to actually pay attention to my English classes more diligently, today's subject was the core reason why I wanted to learn this as a second language. And as you might have guessed by the heavily accented way I am talking to you right now, I eventually did it. All thanks to a relatively obscure RPG developed by Enix that, in my personal opinion, does such an amazing job at capturing your imagination it can even break the language barrier. I'll admit it right away. I may have a bit too much nostalgia for this game, and as a result I might come off as heavily biased towards it. But then again, the purpose of this video and this channel in general is for me to share my passion for video games to the world, and maybe find some like-minded people along the way. And if that ever changes, feel free to call the shit out of me in the comments. In any event, I've been beating around the bush far too much. Let's get to it and finish the first season of this video series with a bang, shall we? Without further ado, these are my thoughts on Valkyrie Profile.
How nostalgic.
Before I get into things proper, I gotta give a little bit of a spoiler warning since I am going to cover the majority of the events of the story as well as the multiple endings this game has. I'm not exactly going to do a full recap, but there are some things that I want to point out, and those might or might not ruin your experience of the game. So skip this section if you're interested in seeing the story. With that out of the way, let's get to it. Our story begins in Asgard, the land of the gods. As our protagonist, lengrh Valkyrie, awakens from a long sleep, we are informed that Ragnarok, the end of the world, draws near, and as such, the Aesir, the faction of gods commanded by Odin, have to prepare for the final confrontation with the Vanir, which is why he has summoned Valkyrie, to bring brave souls from Midgard to bolster their ranks and gain the advantage in the upcoming war. After some introductions and a bit of a chat about how the whole recruiting process works, we then cut to Midgard, where we meet two of our many party members. One, a seasoned mercenary by the name of Arngrim, and the bratty princess of the kingdom of Artolia, Yelanda. Over the course of what I felt was like an hour of cutscenes, we learned that A. Arngrim isn't a very big fan of the king or how he governs the kingdom. But as a mercenary, he really doesn't care and only lives for the next battle, using the money he earns to support his brother Roland, who is constantly sick and has a general frail health. B. Yelanda, after seeing Arngrim disrespect her father, wishes to get back at the god's lookalike by hiring him for work and do some unspecified menial tasks, which we never learn about because when they are about to discuss that topic, Yelanda gets drunk on sake and passes out. See? While all of this is happening in the background, there is a guy named Lombard, who is a spy from a neighboring kingdom, who then kidnaps Yelanda and hires Arngrim to smuggle her in secret to said kingdom. And when Artolia's royal guard catches up to him, they feed her a potion that transforms her into a demon that Arngrim is forced to kill. And D, after dealing with Lombard with the help of lengrh, Arngrim confronts the guards and promptly commits suicide, earning his place alongside Yelanda as one of lengrh's Einherjar, souls that she can summon to battle alongside her. From there, we as players are let loose to explore the rest of Midgard, finding more Einherjar and train them to be sent to Valhalla to help the war efforts. Now, I'm going to go into more details about the plot in a bit, but first I want to talk about my biggest gripe I've had with this game ever since I played it for the first time. The introduction sequence goes on for too long. I'm serious, the whole introduction of the plot and the recruitment sequence for the first two characters of the party is long enough that I could make dinner and finish it with time to spare, even if I was mashing through the text. It's interesting, I'll give it that, but going through that much plot tires me out, to the point that this has been one of the reasons why I come back to this game so infrequently. And outside some minor details, most of it doesn't even play into the main story of the game. It's very telling that the Android version of this game lets you skip all of this and leaves you at the beginning of the first dungeon, which is the only positive thing I will ever say about that port of the game, despite the fact that it would leave a good chunk of players without context, but at least that's a solution. The first time you play the game, sure, it's interesting and fun to watch, but on subsequent replays, since you can't skip this whole sequence in any other version of this game, it becomes tedious. But hey, again, there is at least the positive fact that the story is at least intriguing and gives you quite a bit of context about how life is in Midgard. And it also familiarizes you with the other Einherjar you would encounter down the line. Anyways, let's move into aspects of the story that I consider positive. Or, to be more honest, the plot points and mini-arcs that are part of this game that I thoroughly enjoyed, and that made this game's story so fascinating to me. Since I already talked about the introduction of Arngrim and Yelanda, I might as well talk about a side story that goes in the background for quite some time during the game, from about the introduction to arguably chapter 7 of the main story. All of this covered through multiple recruiting sequences. You see, Arngrim's suicide starts a chain of events that destroys an entire group of adventurers, ruins the life of a specific person in the biggest conga line of traumatic events never known to man, and also gives the player the biggest tease ever, only to leave you hanging, ending this whole arc in a pretty sad and I dare say sour note. It all begins after Arngrim's death. Since he's pretty much on a grave and can't exactly pay for his crimes, the whole brunt of it falls to his closest family member, the frail and sick Roland. This turn of events doesn't sit well with one of Arngrim's closest friends and another perfect Einherjar candidate, Lofr, the son of the captain of the guard. He finds it unfair that Roland is paying for Arngrim's crimes, a sentiment he communicates with his group of friends and adventuring party, Celia and Cashel, who are pretty much against Luffer's decision of breaking Roland out of prison at the risk of his own life. And despite their protest, the young blood goes through with it, and if you paid attention to the premise of this game, then you know how this ends for Luffer. We then catch up with Cashel and Celia sometime later in Camille Village, a small settlement near Artolia that has been struck by a creature or some type of curse that converted most of its people into stone. Both of them have been tasked with finding any remaining survivors or petrified people that haven't been turned into pieces and turn them back to normal via a special concoction. They managed to find a little kid in what appears to be a catacomb, who seems to be the catalyst for this whole disaster by unleashing a lesser demon upon the village. Cashel is about to deliver the magical potion to Celia to save the kid, when suddenly he gets stabbed by said lesser demon, using his last breath to prevent the potion from breaking, and then leaving Celia to mourn the death of his companion, but still standing strong as she still has a mission to complete. Now meet Aelia, another friend of the party who got separated from them at some point for some unknown reason. But sadly, she is not in the best of situations as she has been kidnapped by an evil sorcerer known as Gander, who tortures her to death as he is trying to get information about the location of an item known as the Dragon Orb, which Aelia doesn't really know about. Not that it matters, as she really wasn't going to give up any sort of information, which is why she just resisted the torture until she died. Valkyrie, having witnessed this, recruits Aelia, promising to get back at Gander for what he did. This doesn't seem to be important until the very end of Aelia's recruitment sequence, where she asks Lynette for a simple favor, to relay an important piece of information to her friends, wherever they are. A simple task for a Valkyrie, really. This piece of information is relayed to the last remaining member of the group, and it is the location of a man that has been the driving force of this group for quite a while. His name? Grey. With the location of Grey revealed and not much else to lose, Celia makes her way into the Arcane Ruins, an ancient place where lots of spirits and undead roam around, and also the location of a giant crystal with a woman sealed inside it. At the center of this place, the fateful confrontation between Celia and her quarry takes place, and before she goes for the finishing strike on the Armored Knight, she asks a simple question. Celia, by this point, is clearly broken by the whole experience, losing each and every one of his friends and loved ones in what appears to be a series of random events that took away everything from her. In this moment, the only thing that Grey can really say is "I'm sorry" before the armor he is wearing crumples to the ground, revealing the fact that he had already lost his body, horrifying Celia and leaving her as a broken mess, having lost not only his friends, but the only reason why she even kept fighting. And sadly, this is the last time we ever hear from Celia in the story. This, to me, is the moment that made me realize that this game's story was something special, because while you as the player know what happens to the characters that died during this whole arc, you also get to see the perspective of someone who doesn't know this, and just how fucked up the world of Midgard really is. The fact that through a seemingly random series of party recruitment scenes the game manages to tell a story like this fascinates me. And perhaps my favorite part of the whole Celia arc is the final confrontation with Grey, because even before starting the cutscene, when you do its respective concentration sequence in-game, it leads you to think that she is the one who is about to be recruited, when in reality, Grey is the one that gets chosen in the end. It just gives it that extra impact to how it all ends. Obviously, not only the Celia arc does this. All of the character recruitment sequences tell their own unique stories that flesh out every Eichenhard you come across, even if some of them don't get much in the main scenario. And they also give context about the various lands and continents of the Land of the Mortals. This is another thing that Valkyrie Profile manages to do amazingly in my opinion. The world building around Midgard, the place that you spend 99% of the story exploring. It sometimes feels a bit like a hodgepodge of multiple medieval fantasy cultures, like going from samurais to holy knights and even Hogwarts before Hogwarts, and yes, I checked, this game came out in Japan before the Harry Potter books got translated into Japanese. But as you go around each location, it still feels interconnected and natural, to the point where I really don't question the fact that you have a party in which samurais, sorcerers, and knights are all running around together. And it adds a cool factor to the game that I really like. Then there's the underlying tone to this game. At first glance, sure, this game seems like your standard fantasy setting like Dungeons and Dragons, But as you learn more about it, you realize that it's pretty grim. Not like all grimdark all the time, but almost every kingdom you visit is ripe with conflict, slavery, wars, and all of this with a healthy dose of monsters on the side. Also, I think the pace at which the story is told, while not perfect, is quite alright. Since this game is structured into chapters with a hard time limit, you always have something to do, either exploring a dungeon or recruiting a new character. Although I do admit that by chapter 7 you're pretty much just waiting for the endgame to start and get your respective ending. Which is another thing I wanted to talk about, the multiple endings of this game and how they differ from each other, not only from a story standpoint, but also player perspective as well. There are 3 possible endings that you can get depending on what actions you take over the course of the story. 2 of them are only available to difficulties normal or higher, and the other one can be accessed pretty much in any given difficulty. I will get over the differences between each one during the gameplay section, of course. Also, just as a reminder, big spoilers from here on out, so if you don't want to get the plot ruined for you, go to this specific time in the video now. For those who wish to stay, let's move on. Ending C requires you to drop your evaluation level to 0 3 times by essentially stealing artifacts from Odin and wasting time without doing much of anything. The easiest way to get it is to just open the pause menu on the world map, press start and skip time for like 3 chapters. Then Freya will come around and tell you that you're doing a horrible job, so you're sent back to sleep via unwinnable battle against the goddess of fertility. More than an ending, this is a non-standard game over, which can only really be triggered by players who hoard artifacts. Which honestly is not worth to do all the time since most of them are pretty useless, although a couple of ones like weapons and armor sometimes are a bit helpful, so that's that I guess. Also, you can get some tidbits about what is really going on behind the scenes in the story by triggering this ending. Ending B, on the other hand, requires you nothing more than to do what you are told. Basically a regular playthrough of the game if you didn't know how to trigger ending A in advance. In this ending, after finishing all 8 chapters of the story, you go and assault Jotunheim Palace, where the king of the Vanir, Surt, sits on his throne. It is your duty to finish him off with your well-trained Einhar and bring victory back to the Aesir. There's nothing really spectacular about this ending, but if you pay attention to what Surt says upon defeat and some of the things that happen afterwards, it makes it very clear that there's more to it than it meets the eye. And this is where ending A comes into play, and the events that lead to it start as soon as you hit chapter 4 of the story. As you recruit Lorenta, a respected teacher of the Magic Academy in Flensburg, you learn of the person that orchestrated her death, the former #1 student of the Academy and Harry Potter lookalike, Lesard Valeth. Since he is a rather dangerous individual, Lenneth decides to assault his tower and stop the madman from realizing his ambitions. Although, despite having a confrontation with him, at the end of the day he escapes rather unscathed, and planting a seed of doubt on the Valkyrie by asking a single question.
You really don't have any idea what you are, do you?
This, alongside an encounter with the Lord of the Undead, Brahms, puts into question Odin's true motives and the nature of Lenneth's mission in Midgard. But for the time being, we can't sit around and ponder about it too much since there's still a mission you have to fulfill. In chapter 5 we meet another student of the Academy, Mistina, an acquaintance of Lesart from back in the day, who, after prying a bit too much about him and his recently acquired powers, gets frozen to death for her troubles and decides to join Lenneth, figuring that since the sorcerer has a crazy fascination on her, she might as well hang around and get her revenge. We then meet another Einhar, Lucian, who, if you watch the prologue of the game that's available in the main menu, you may recognize as the boy who tried to escape with Platina after her parents tried to sell her to slavers. Now grown up, he lives the Robin Hood lifestyle of stealing from the rich while giving it to the poor, but still remembers his childhood love. Sadly, the thief lifestyle proves to be Lucian's undoing, as one of his friends steals from a noble who then uses that as an excuse to commit mass genocide on the people of the slums where Lucian lives, him getting caught in the crossfire and then getting chosen by Lenneth, who strangely looks suspiciously similar to Platina, piquing the man's curiosity but leaving the subject for the time being. Sometime later, either at the end of chapter 5 or later in chapter 6 depending on how long you want to keep Lucian around, he gets transferred to Valhalla, but not before traveling to his home village one last time to reminisce with Lenneth about his childhood and the places he used to visit with Platina. culminating with a kiss between the goddess and her Eichenhaar, and the revelation that Lenneth had developed feelings for him, even if love between mortals and gods is virtually impossible. This combination of events makes Lenneth not only question Odin, but also the truth behind what she really is and the nature of her very being as one of the goddesses that governs destiny. And the final straw that breaks everything is learning about Lucian's death in Chapter 7, after he's been set up and later slain by Loki, so that the god of deception could get his hands on Midgard's most powerful artifact, the aforementioned Dragon Orb, for his own nefarious purposes. And so we arrive at Chapter 8, where after clearing all the dungeons in the chapter, if you did all the events in their proper time, you get an extra concentration sequence where Lenneth goes to Platina's resting place, the Weeping Lily Meadow, and she learns a horrifying truth. Valkyries are all put in human bodies and given regular Midgardian lives while they are not used by Odin, and when they are called out for duty, their memories on their time as mortals are sealed away as to prevent them from having that as a distraction. But with the seal on Lenneth's memories broken up by Lucian, she is pretty much not down on the whole idea of helping Odin, so he promptly seals her away and summons Hirst, her sister, to take her place instead. This obviously doesn't sit well with Two and Herjar that can't be transferred to Valhalla, Arngrim and Mistina, who are also saved by Lenneth's soul before the Black Valkyrie blasts them to bits. And with her soul scattered, they make an uneasy alliance with Lizard, who has his own shady motives for helping them, and Brahms, who is not exactly a fan of Odin. With their powers combined, they give the ass-kicking of a lifetime to Hirst and put Lenneth's soul back together with her body via a homunculus that Lizard created, which is a plot point that came about during Lizard's tower dungeon and Mistina's recruitment scene. With her full body and memories recovered, she is ready to go back to Valhalla and take on the Old Father herself in retribution for what he did. Although that gets sidetracked by the fact that Loki is now wreaking havoc across the realm of the gods, ready to wipe out all creation and become their new ruler with the power of the Dragon Orb. From here, I am going to leave out the details of the final dungeon and confrontation with Loki because I personally feel that that's the best part of Ending A. But needless to say, this whole scenario is fantastic. Seeing Lenneth grow more and more as she interacts with mortals is an amazing arc for her character in my opinion, and to give the best example about how much she changes over the course of the story, let's take a look at two of the Eichenhaar that you can recruit along the way. First is Llewellyn, a young archer who is sent to war and then dies, leaving his love interest behind in sadness. Before recruiting him, Lenneth lets him see her one more time before parting, even though she herself mentions that this is not part of her duty and that she is no love goddess. Then we meet Badrak, a thief, spy, assassin, and overall awful guy who is just one step away from being sent to Niflheim to suffer in eternity for all the crimes he committed in life. But the only reason he doesn't suffer said fate is because he mentions the only good deed he ever did in his life, saving a girl from a group of slavers, which he claims he did out of spite for not getting paid enough. This, and the metaphor about a flower that only blooms once a full moon, are the only reasons why Lenneth decides to keep him around and save him from eternal damnation, because she developed a sense of empathy towards mortals and saw that there's potential to redeem even the most horrible of individuals. So yeah, I think Valkyrie Profile story is perhaps one of the best video game narratives, at least of its generation, if not one of the best of the RPG genre. And I'm glad I got to a point in my life in which I have enough grasp of the English language to understand it. If the gameplay was the thing that kept me coming back to this game as a kid, the story is now what keeps pulling me back as an adult all these years later, and it is a testament on just how fantastically written it is in my opinion. Believe me, play through this game just for the story. It's worth it. Valkyrie Profile is gorgeous. I'm sorry, but there's no other way of putting it. The art direction in this game, in my opinion, is impeccable. The backgrounds, the sprites, the character art, everything is so beautiful that it almost brings a tear to my eye every time I boot up this game. And honestly, why wouldn't I? I mean, just look at the introduction sequence in Valhalla. The backdrops of the islands that conform Asgard alongside the petals that are flowing through the wind is a breathtaking sight. I would say that this is one of the most beautiful pieces of scenery, not only of its generation, but of the entire RPG genre. The backgrounds in this game are all made through pre-rendering methods, similar to what Resident Evil does, but in 2D. And they even have some level of interactivity to them. For example, in the Sunken Shrine dungeon there is a clockwork-like mechanism that you have to hang on in order for it to work. And despite the fact that it is a bit obvious that it's playing an FMV, it still meshes quite well with the rest of the background. But the fact that they are pre-rendered is not the only thing that makes them special. The designs themselves are also quite unique and distinct from each other, even when you end up visiting locations that are sort of similar in theme, like abandoned castles, dark caverns, or luxurious palaces. For example, Bram's Castle and Celestial Castle may look similar at first, but once you start exploring them you may realize that they are quite different. Bram's Castle is a little bit more dark and creepy looking, fitting for the Lord of Vampires, but Celestial Castle looks more well kept and royal, just like its owner, the vampire lady Genevieve. Then we have the more unique and out there dungeons, like Clockwork Mansion, a Japanese looking building that a couple of ways in turns into a crazy maze, with rooms turning upside down, left and right in all directions, making for a rather disorienting experience, but all in all quite fun to explore. And then there is Arianrod Labyrinth, one of the 2 dungeons that you can explore in Chapter 8, which looks like a strange, almost alien-like series of rooms full of teleporters. And while it may seem out of place for this game, it still looks amazing and almost futuristic in nature, which is an aesthetic I can subscribe to. I could go on and on about the backgrounds in this game for days, but for the sake of expediency I will keep it short and say that the work done in designing the dungeons, cities, and even some of the places you don't ever visit in the game are all just amazingly crafted, and this aspect of the presentation alone makes the game stand out immensely. But obviously there's other aspects to the art design in this game, and the one that you'll be paying most of your attention to is the 2D sprites that are used for all the characters involved with the story. And again, the people in charge of the art of this game made a masterful work with them. The sprite work, in terms of quality of drawing at least, looks quite fantastic, although I guess that they are a little bit small. But in terms of animations they are quite fluid and flashy looking. Almost like a combination between SNK's detail in designs and most Capcom games in terms of the fluidity of the animations, albeit in a reduced size. The same goes for the monsters in this game, which also do suffer from the limited variety of animations, and they even end up reusing some of the sprites for higher level enemies, which granted is kinda bad, but I let it slide since this isn't exactly a problem unique to Valkyrie Profile. Finally, for this section we have the character portraits, which are a part of the presentation that highly contrasts with the other visual elements in this game, since they have a different art style to them that looks kinda medieval, almost Renaissance-like, but with a touch of Japanese art that I can't quite describe. I'm not exactly an art major, so I couldn't really pinpoint my feelings on this, but all you need to know is that the art pieces are fantastic, and while some of the general ones do not tickle my fancy that much, there are some specific ones that are used throughout the story that add just even more to the already gorgeous scenes, making them feel extra special. I said it at the top of this section, but I'll repeat it again. This game is gorgeous, and I can confidently say that even when at its weakest, it's still stunning, compelling, and majestic. One could say that perhaps I'm looking at it with rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, but just take a look at the game and tell me it doesn't impress you a little. Almost 20 years later, this game still looks top-notch, and I bet it'll still hold up way down the line. This game's presentation is just unique and magical, which encapsulates the feeling of this entire game. Definitely another good reason to check it out. Just like this game on the Collective Unconscious, the name Motoi Sakuraba isn't spoken that much in terms of great RPG composers, which I feel is a crime, since his compositions, not only for this game, but other Enix titles like Star Ocean, are just a treat for the ears. Valkyrie Profile soundtrack is no exception. I have kept some tracks from this soundtrack on my music list since I can remember, but I totally forgot just how amazing the overall soundtrack is. Every single track knocks it out of the park with how greatly they set the tone for each scene, dungeon, and even battles. And all of this hits you as soon as you start the game, with a beautiful scene of Leneth in a white dress, followed by perhaps one of the best introductory tracks I've ever heard in any RPG, named To the Unhallowed Ground, which accompanies the introductory credit sequence while also showing a serene scene of Leneth walking through the fields of Valhalla. The entire soundtrack as a whole evokes so many different emotions and sets the tone for every single scene so masterfully that I can't but feel all the love that was poured into the creation of this music. Sure, the instruments do sound a little bit weird at times, but I also feel that they somehow fit with this game's aesthetic. I do not think I can convey through my words how much I love this entire soundtrack, nor do I think I can really make it justice for this review, since I'm no musical expert and couldn't precisely tell you what makes this music so magical, so all I will say is this. Valkyrie Profile's soundtrack manages to do something that few others can, which is being able to improve the other aspects of this game by virtue of being there, while also still sounding great as a standalone series of compositions. Not every day you found a soundtrack like that, and I really recommend you to check it out. Now, since this is a PlayStation game and it comes in 2 discs, of course it has to come with one of the staples that games of this era like to include regardless of if the game needs it or not, and that's voice acting. 90s anime voice acting. Don't get me wrong, I really appreciate the fact that they wanted to give this game this type of treatment, and I'm actually surprised they pulled most of the voice cast from the Pokemon anime. But to say it's perfect would be a lie. In fact, this may be the weakest aspect of this game so far. That being said, some of the performances are quite good. In particular, Megan Hollingshead as Leneth, which I am glad it was the case since you spend most of your time with her, and James Carter as Belenus, one of the minor characters and perhaps my personal favorite Eichenjar. By the way, can somebody in the comments tell me if it's pronounced Eichenjar or Eichenjar or Eichenjar or whatever? I can't seem to grasp the pronunciation on that one. Obviously, I have nothing but praises for the whole audio aspect of this game. I can't recommend enough that you listen to the soundtrack, pay attention to the voice acting sometimes, and even appreciate the sound effects. Audio for sure is another aspect that Valkyrie Profile excels at.
You had slain her with one of your arrows. To my side, my noble Einherjar. These freaks look like trouble.
Oh man, speaking of not being able to do something justice, I mean, this game more than any other holds a special place in my heart, mainly because of its gameplay, so I don't think any metaphor about meat and potatoes could be up to snuff for this one. So let's just get to it, because there is quite a bit to unpack here for sure. Welcome to the gameplay section. Starting with the non-combat mechanics, let me talk to you about how the general plot progression is structured out, since I mentioned in the story section that you have a hard time limit to get to the endgame. Every chapter in the game is divided by periods, units that represent the passage of time in Midgard. Traveling to any location in the world will cost you a particular number of periods depending on what type of location it is. For example, visiting any regular town like Artolia or Lassen will only take you 1 period, since it's not exactly an important location. But on the other hand, if you visit any dungeon, it will take 2 periods instead, although there are some dungeons that only take 1 period since they are technically inside a town. But those are rare cases. To unlock new places, you have to do concentration sequences that will tell you about the location in question, and that in itself will also cost you periods, at least if there are new locations to be discovered. So it is important that you keep track of how many periods you have left at some points during the story if you are aiming for ending A, since some of the time windows are pretty tight. And also, you can expend any number of periods in the menu to heal your party, since they don't automatically heal when you exit a dungeon, except for very specific instances. 1 period will heal your HP, 2 will cure you of certain negative statuses, and 3 is a full heal. I never quite used that functionality because I never found myself in the need for that type of healing in the main game, since I had plenty of items and one of the passive abilities lets you heal for quite a bit in any given turn, and status effects are not as big of an issue in this game. All in all, the whole period managing is a neat idea, although there's really not that much to do in most chapters, so you'll end up having periods to spare at the end of any given chapter, really. Now let's move on to character progression and other mechanics of a similar kind, shall we? And first of all, this is one of the aspects of this game that is affected by difficulty settings. If you start a new game on easy or normal, every time you recruit a new Untitled, he will come with a predetermined level that matches what the game expects you to be at that point in the game. On the other hand, if you start on hard mode, any new character you get will start at level 1, and you will have to level them up either through battle or using the experience orb system. You'd think that getting every single character at level 1 would actually be a detriment, but thanks to the structure of this game and a couple of special items you can get, it is actually better to start at a low level and then work your way up there. Meet the Bracelet of Zoe and the Emerald Necklace, two items that regularly do nothing in terms of stats, but upon leveling up will net nice bonuses to your characters. The Bracelet of Zoe gives your character 200 extra permanent HP, and the Emerald Necklace will give your character 100 extra capacity points to spend on skills. The bonus to HP, or Divine Materialize energy as the game calls it, is pretty neat, but the one that's pretty good is the extra CP every level. But what exactly is CP? Well, CP stands for capacity points, and as I've just said, you can use those capacity points to buy skills for your party members, including Valkyrie. Every time a character levels up, you get a small number of CP to spend, but with the Emerald Necklace bonus you get way more, especially since you can stack those bonuses, making it so that by going up 5 levels with 2 necklaces, you can get the maximum number of capacity points to spend, and use it like crazy so that newer characters can catch up more easily. All of this sounds fine and all, but what kinds of skills can you get in this game? Well, a lot actually. You have 4 types of skill lists that you can browse and even expand over the course of the game, and they range from passive support abilities like receiving amounts of healing for free every turn, active ones like the ability to turn your regular counters into combos, and some that can enhance your powers like giving mages the ability to act every turn, sacrificing HP, or using that HP to power up your attacks or even bypass enemy defenses. For the 4th type, you have a list of Dungeons & Dragons style stats that will do nothing for your regular gameplay, save for a couple of exceptions, but they are important for when you transfer your characters to Valhalla, since they determine if they can survive the ongoing war there, or if they permanently die. Once you have the skills that you want to buy for your characters, you can spend any excess of CP on traits, aspects of your character's personalities that make them more or less heroic. And with upgrades, they either reduce the penalty to their heroic value or they can increase it. This is another important aspect to the characters that get transferred to Asgard, since the evaluation you receive at the end of every chapter by Freya depends on how high their heroic value is, as well as how high are the skills required for a transferred character for that chapter. Since we're on the topic of character transfers, might as well mention how it works and what is its main purpose for the overall game. Anytime you're in the world map, you can use the transfer option in your pause menu to send up 2 characters per chapter to Asgard. What this means is that they get removed permanently from your party with their current equipment, which can affect their chances of surviving the war in Asgard during the main game. So you gotta keep that in mind before you send them, especially if you equip them with items that you might want to keep around like the Emerald Necklace or the Bracelet of Zoe. Once you run out of periods in a chapter, you will then enter into a sacred phase, where Freya will check up on your evaluation level and the Untitled you sent to see if you did a good job or not. Here you can also check the status of your characters to see how they are doing and their deeds in Asgard. If you send them sufficiently prepared, then there should be no problem. But if you somehow sent an underprepared character, they might run the risk of dying, which is both sad and also removes the ability to use those characters during the Seraphic Gate bonus dungeon. So if you want to go back to any specific party formation, you better make sure you send them well equipped. After catching up on the status of your Untitled, Freya will then give you the results of your evaluation, which affects how many Materialize points, the currency of this game, you get for this chapter. And if you did a particularly good job, you can even receive special items that tend to be well above those you can get in normal dungeons, including special artifacts. With the evaluation done, Freya will then instruct you about the requirements and what type of Untitled they want for the next chapter. Most of these tend to fit a particular character you either already have or can recruit in that chapter. But honestly, as long as they have a high hero value and at least some of the desired traits, you can do just fine. You can even buy special equipment that will give characters skills or traits that they can't get on their own. so you're free to send whoever you want as long as they cover the requirements. Now that I covered what I believe are the important mechanics that are more peripheral to the game, why don't we finally dive into perhaps my two favorite aspects of this game: dungeon exploring and combat. Unlike most RPGs of the era where dungeons are pretty much just a series of beautiful backgrounds, Valkyrie Profile instead turns them into platforming challenges, puzzles, and even the occasional interactive element that helps you traverse across whatever location you're walking about. I personally love this approach since it lends itself for a dynamic experience where not only do you have to worry about combat, but also you gotta think about how to tackle some of the puzzles this game throws at you. The perfect example of this is the Salerno Research Facility dungeon, where you have to make your way through a series of rooms where the path is blocked by plants of different colors by using different types of scents and burning the vines along the way. All of this while running around and quickly changing between scents. This may sound a bit confusing, and sometimes it is, but once you get the hang of it, it's just a matter of remembering what type of scent you have to have at any given moment. But the gimmicks are not the only thing that make dungeons interesting. The structure of them is also part of the fun, with different types of rooms that will test your ability to control lengrh and her ability to platform around the many rooms and perils in her way. They even managed to make item chests dynamic by adding traps to some of them, which makes it so that you have to be cautious about opening them and also being prepared to react accordingly to the various types of traps you can find in them. The only complaint I have about the exploration is that lengrh controls kinda bad. I feel there's kind of a delay between the button press and when she starts moving, which makes precise jumps harder than they should be, especially when the dungeon itself requires you to jump from tiny platform to tiny platform. Also, while most of the puzzles are fine, there are some of them that felt a little bit obtuse to me, like the one where you have to raise water levels in the sunken shrine, which, while I gave props for its use of FMV backgrounds, I think it also does a poor job at telling you have to stay on the mechanism for multiple clicks in order for you to raise the water level higher and higher. Other than that, I love the overall design of the dungeons in this game. The difficulty curve progresses quite well in my opinion, with the early ones being smaller and more simplistic in nature, and the later ones having more complex gimmicks and are quite expansive. Helped by the fact that the music and the visuals are both quite top-notch, the gameplay manages to tie it all together to make one of the most memorable experiences I've had in an RPG, and even to this day I get excited about the prospect of exploring each and every one of them. And on a final note, shoutouts to the game for also having different dungeons for different difficulties, elevating the replay value of the game even more. And so it comes to the final aspect of this game I want to talk about, and what I think is the aspect that attracted me the most about this game when I was a kid, because I couldn't understand and enjoy the story back then, and I was too young to truly appreciate the visuals and the music. For me, it was all about combat. There are two ways you can start combat in this game. The first and most common one is finding enemies in a dungeon, which you can preemptively hit to get the first turn in combat without restrictions. And the other one is automatic encounters like bosses or monsters in trapped chests, which might sometimes put you on a disadvantage by letting the enemy attack first or limiting your character actions in certain ways. Once combat starts, regardless of how you entered into it, you will be taken into the battle screen, which will always display both enemies and your party in different size, with the enemies taking the left and your characters the right. And if you pay attention to the formation of your characters, you might notice something in particular. If your first thought was, wow, they look like the face buttons on my controller, then congratulations, you already understand half of the combat. So let me explain the other half. Combat in Valkyrie Profile is done turn-based style, but unlike most other games in the genre, the turns are structured in such a way that all the characters in one side make their actions, and then the other side takes their turn. At first, this may sound a little bit lopsided on the enemy's favor, but once you get a grasp of how actions work, you can see it's quite the opposite. For your characters to take an action, you just need to press their corresponding button on the formation, and they will make an attack. And this is where it gets fun, because you can trigger multiple attacks on the same target at the same time. Or, to put it more simply, you can do fighting game style combos in this game. As you continue to hit the enemy, a little bar on the left side will start to fill up, and if it gets full, you will then get access to special moves known as Purify Weird Soul, a flashy finishing maneuver that will take a good chunk of the enemy's life away, and you can even do multiple of these attacks in rapid succession, with the strength of each one increasing the farther along the chain they are. Every PWS attack is unique to each character and they have different properties, except for mages, but I will get to those in a bit. Some of them, like Belenus' Extreme Void or Laufer's Justice Stream, do a relatively low number of hits, which will make it harder to chain further moves. But in exchange, they hit like a truck and will take out huge portions of the life out of enemies, particularly bosses. Others, like Llewellyn's Slayer Storm or Valkyrie's Nibelang Balesti, do less damage but have more hits, which makes it so that you can chain other more powerful moves easily. But they lack on the damage department. Obviously, because being able to spam these moves would be a little bit broken, you have to deal with another combat mechanic, known as charge time. If you look at the bottom of the screen underneath the character's health, there is a little bar with purple dots. These purple dots represent the number of turns you have to wait before that character is able to perform another PWS attack again. Or, in the case of mages, the number of turns they have to wait before they can use another magic spell. And if they have even 1 point of charge, then they are pretty much sitting ducks, unless you have a specific ability that lets them attack with their familiars. So you gotta be conscious about when you use your PWS attacks. At the beginning this may sound a bit overwhelming, but trust me, the game starts you with an unlimited number of hits per character so that you can get more accustomed to the battle system. And as you get weapons that give your party members more attacks per round, you can start experimenting with their unique animations and properties so that you can come up with the most effective and flashy combos you can imagine, which is something I personally enjoy a lot. Now, mages are a case unto themselves, since they play a bit differently than the rest of the characters. For starters, they don't get more than 1 attack per turn. Instead, they can cast a variety of elemental and support spells to help in battle. They are also super squishy even with help upgrades, which makes it so that they have to sit in the back row or quickly be annihilated. And as I mentioned earlier, their charge times are longer than regular characters. But in exchange, they get some nice benefits to them. For example, magic attacks in this game are unblockable by nature, which makes them perfect for opening even the most guard crazy of creatures. They also deal multiple hits, and some spells can even single-handedly fill up the super meter. Instead of PWS attacks, mages can perform 2 different types of supers that are universal for every mage in the game. The first one is a version of the current magic they have equipped that deals more hits, are more powerful, and can even target all enemies. The other type of super they have at their disposal is Great Magics, which are these huge and flashy FMV sequences that change depending on the base magic you use to cast them. They deal massive damage and of course hit all enemies in the screen. They are perfect to stick up at the end of a PWS chain for massive damage, and of course they incur the highest charge time penalties in the game. You can mitigate this by exploiting another property that combos have in this game. Dealing a high hit count to an enemy, it's not only cool, but can also give you some benefits. The more you hit an enemy, the more chances that you can get special items out of them with every hit. Enemies can drop 3 types of items this way. The first one are purple orbs that reduce the charge time by 1 and are distributed between party members that still have CT left, which is an excellent way to let your mages act again by landing larger combos, thus reducing the CT of particularly demanding spells. The second type of drop you can get are magic crystals, which will increase the amount of experience you get at the end of an encounter. So if you want to expedite the leveling process, then you have to land better combos, and also hope some crystals pop out because they are random. The last type of drop you can get are treasure chests that will give you a variety of items depending on the type of enemy you are hitting, from just regular transmittable items to potions, and in the case of bosses you can even net special items, mostly bracelets of Zoe, although unlike the other types of drops you can only get 1 per enemy, but still, they are quite useful. All of these elements combined make for a pretty awesome combat experience, with the regular encounters being more combo practice tools, aside from the practice mode that you can get in the menu by the way. And bosses are more a test on how fast you can get rid of them before they can unleash devastating attacks against you. Every type of encounter in this game was exciting to me, and some of the later ones were legitimately challenging without landing on the terrain of bullshit. Except maybe for the super boss, but that's to be expected honestly. I always say that not everything is perfect, and this is also true for Valkyrie Profile. But honestly, if there is anything in this world that comes close to that, it has to be this game. And it may seem like I'm blinded by nostalgia, but listen to me for a second. Every single aspect of this game just knocks it out of the park. The visuals are some of the most impressive 2D sprites and backgrounds of the 32-bit era. The audio design helps bring to life the visuals in such a beautiful manner, making them stand out even more. And all of this is tied up amazingly thanks to how fun and easy to grasp the gameplay is once you put a little time on it. Even when sometimes it doesn't work as well, or the rare occasion where there is some wonkiness to the combos. Valkyrie Profile is one of the best RPGs I've ever played, one of the best RPGs that's ever been put out there, and I dare say one of the best RPGs of all time. It's such a shame that this game has gone underrepresented for so many years, shadowed by other classics of this era like most of Square's games at the time, which, don't get me wrong, I recognize that they are some of the best of all time. But I believe Valkyrie Profile deserves to be up there with classics such as Final Fantasy VII in the collective conscious as an all-time great game. I hope that through this video I can bring more attention to this game, and even give you enough curiosity to try it for yourself. I know I was curious about it back in the day when the person that introduced this game to me talked about it. If you can please go out of your way to play it, be it on a physical copy, which by the way are hard to find and expensive as fuck, or emulation, which also has its own disadvantages because most PlayStation 1 emulators have so many issues on how the plugins, especially the video ones, run this game. Either way, it's worth to experience this beautiful game either once or multiple times. I'm sure that you'll end up liking the tale of the Valkyrie named lengrh as much as I did.
I think together we will be able to find happiness.
I want to do something a little bit different this time around with the final section since I already pretty much gave my overall thoughts on Valkyrie Profile. Since this is the first year anniversary of this channel, as I mentioned before, I feel the need to give a little message to the people who has joined in this train ride for the last year ever since that Monster Hunter World video. It's true that right now this is not a big channel both in terms of views or engagement, but I do want to say thanks to each and every one of you who have watched, subscribed, and even gave feedback to my work via comments or otherwise. But at the end of the day, this whole channel is a passion project for me. A space where I can talk about the video games I play, either new or retro, and give my opinion on what makes them great, average, or even sometimes bad. Although I haven't really got to the bad ones, and I mean really bad ones yet. I know this project has not existed for very long, but still, it feels like a lifetime ago when the spark of wanting to start this channel came over me as I played the Monster Hunter World Beta, and I definitely learned, or at least I felt I learned something over the course of these past 12 months. I hope that whenever you started watching, you like anything you saw and wanted to stay, because you better believe there's more to come. After all, this year I haven't covered even a quarter of the stuff that pulled me into gaming back in the day, and the Yakuza series is showing no signs of stopping in the West, and if I can help giving it a little bit more exposure, I will continue to do so gladly. Right now, I do need a little bit of a break. You know, because of the holidays, and I do need to recharge my creative batteries. Come back in February, when I begin another trip down memory lane, but this time is going to be the first stop on a journey through, let's just say, something that was very important to me in my earliest years in gaming. But that is a video for another day. For now, just remember to keep being awesome and nice. I am Hazard Kuyaker, and I'll catch you next year.